Hello and good day. This is Valerie Hawes. Welcome back to the Goodwill Columbus Workforce Development Facebook and YouTube pages. Today, we're going to have our panel discussion, but before we get started, let me just let you know that if you are currently looking for a job, or maybe you're looking to get some extra training so that you can upskill and maybe pursue a new career, or maybe you have a interview coming up and you want to be able to nail that interview and maybe need some assistance with your resume, we're here to help. So just give us a call. You can reach us at 614-966-9283, or hit us up on our email or send us a message here on Facebook. You can also go out here where you see this landing page and you can get started in creating your own resume on Indeed through our partnership with Indeed, so you can advance with Goodwill. But today we're going to be talking about LGBTQIA matters in the community and in the workplace. And so to help me with this subject matter, I've invited two friends and colleagues to come on and talk about this with us all. So first, I want to introduce Ms. Carly Baird, as well as Ebony Partlow. Hi, you guys. How are you both doing today?
Good morning. I'm well.
Excellent.
Thank you for having us.
You know what? I already did something wrong, and I already know what I did wrong. And Carly knows what I just did wrong. And this is why I wanted to have this discussion, because I think I said to you, I think I said, hey, lady. And Carly said in a conversation just recently that's unacceptable. That's not what not that it's unacceptable, but that's not Carly's preference. So Carly, can we first talk about pronouns and preferences? And absolutely. I did that by mistake. So first of all, forgive me, because I knew better than to do that. It was just something natural that flowed out.
What a great experience to share this with everyone, because it happens all the time. It happens all the time, right? And not to say it's okay, it's okay to misgender someone or something like that. But you don't know what someone's preferences are unless you ask. So I think it's really important to ask about pronouns. I'm Carly. I use she, her pronouns. I could be I could even be more aware and introduce myself like that all the time. But there's some intricacies that come in. First, we're talking about a couple different things, I think, today. There's sexuality, there's the LGBTQ, there's sexuality, but then there's also how we represent, gender identity and gender representation and how I move through the world, right? I'm a gender non-conforming person. I use she, her pronouns, but I don't really love being called girl or lady or, or miss or, and those are things that you wouldn't know because it's these intricacies. And so I think it's important to ask what someone's pronouns are. I think that's a respectful thing to do without getting into too much detail, right? We're talking about in the workplace. You don't want to just dive in there and, ask, oh, great. Like, what kind of people do you sleep with? That's not always the most, appropriate conversation in the workplace, but you can, of course, ask pronouns. And once you get to know someone more, ask, how they like to be identified and how they like to be referred to.
Well, but let me say this. Would you at least admit that it's a little confusing when people have associated pronouns with titles per se? Because like for me, I understand you, if I see that as soon as someone says, oh, my preferred pronoun is she, her, then I'm going to be like girl and lady. And you know what I mean? And I don't know. I didn't even know that they didn't go together until I heard you say it. And I was like, oh, darn. Okay, now I'm really confused. Now I'm glad we're having this conversation. Oh, God. Okay.
Totally. You know what? I don't know if anybody else does that. I don't know, Ebony, if you can speak to this or not, but like these are things that I'm figuring out, to be honest with you. I'm just figuring out that like, I don't really love being called lady. And, it's like, And
But
it's just something that
she likes dude and bro. So I'm like, now you got me all messed up. Messed up. I can't.
just call me by my name. Just call me by my name.
I'm so old. I can't remember all these things. Okay, I'm gonna try though. Okay, and Ebony, would you mind? First of all, and I didn't even allow you to introduce yourself, but I've talked to you too much already, Carly. Let's introduce Ebony first, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, so I'm Ebony. I also. Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say?
Ebony, go ahead. Introduce yourself to us. Tell us who you are, what you do for a living, and anything else you want to share.
Sure. So I'm Ebony, and I do use she/her pronouns as well. I am the board president for a local nonprofit called Black Out and Proud. We Black LGBTQ folk here in the community. We work to provide safer spaces that are affirming and welcoming, and we really envision a place where Black LGBTQ people can be thriving as opposed to just surviving. And celebrated within our community, within the LGBT community, and also within the Black community. During the day, I work as an administrator for Franklin County Children's Services.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Carly, like I said, Carly is one of my former colleagues, so I get to pick on her, and she gets to pick on me too, so no big deal. Carly, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thanks, Valerie. So yeah, my name's Carly, and I use she/her pronouns, and I am a trainer, a coach. I'm a master's level social student or social work student right now, and I'm a proponent for treating people equally, fairly, justly, and with love. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. All right. So in my role at Goodwill Columbus, especially when I started, my role was really surrounding employee training and making sure that people were understanding diversity and inclusion issues. And I would teach those classes. We teach some of those classes even currently online, as well as a part of our career development, or I'm sorry, our career boot camps that we do. And when I thought about having these discussions, because they are sensitive matters, right? It is real life. We never know who we're going to be working with, what their walk of life is. And we want to make sure that when we are in the workplace, that we are conducting ourselves professionally, but also as we, what I know for sure is that in the workplace, in order to truly be productive, you have to build relationships. And in order to build relationships in the workplace, you need to know how to do that effectively and what's appropriate to ask, what conversations are appropriate, and how to even dive into some of these tough situations, especially when you see things in the news. Sometimes what we see in the news relates to who we are as an individual, impacts us individually. And as much as we like to keep that stuff at home, it follows us to the workplace sometimes. So when I thought about, okay, let's have a real discussion about the LGBTQ plus community. Let's talk about what those letters stand for. Let's talk about how we should address one another in the workplace. And anything else that you two think that we should on. Let's start with the LGBTQ plus community. Now, I know in the title of this video, I put LGBTQIA, but Carly said it's probably best if I just do LGBTQ plus. Now, Carly, want to tell me why do you think that is? First of all, let's talk about what does LGBTQIA stand for. Let me see if I know, and you tell me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna see if I know what I'm talking about. L is for lesbian, B is for bisexual. No, I'm sorry, G is for gay. It's lesbian, G is gay. B is bisexual, T is transgender, Q is questioning or queer, I is I don't know, and A, I don't know either. So how did I do?
I think you did great. I'm going to actually defer to Ebony if she knows the I and the A.
Yeah, absolutely. So the I is both, is for intersex, can be for intersex, and the A is it can be for asexual, but also for ally. And so, yeah. So I think you did great. I think
community.
exactly.
I'll be darned. So
Yeah.
then that's everybody.
Well, not everybody's an ally.
Because everybody's not always an ally. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
One day, maybe.
Okay, all right. Now go ahead, Carly, and you know what, guys, I'm gonna step away from the computer for a second. Carly, why don't you explain why you thought it was best to do plus? This is so unprofessional. My computer just told me it's losing battery, so I need to go get my plug. So I'm gonna let you guys talk. I'm gonna step away and just lead this conversation for a bit, Carly. I'll be right back.
Oh, we got this. Hey, Ebony.
Hey.
Yeah, I mean, I referred or recommended that you use the plus only because I've seen that the most recently. And I think my understanding is that it's the most inclusive. But I don't know. What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of preference. I mean, the plus does, it is inclusive of the I and the A, but sometimes we'll just add the I and the A as well. And like we talked about too, sometimes people don't want to use all the letters and they just use an umbrella term like queer. So I think it's just a matter of preference, really.
Yeah, we had a really good conversation earlier about, I mean, matter of preference. I think is that that's like if you were to take something away, like not everybody refers to themselves in the same way. Not everybody has the same, like it's this it's this concept of cultural humility, is that like we're constantly learning and we're constantly like, just because I know one queer person doesn't mean I know you. Doesn't mean that I know what your experience is like. But we were talking earlier about queer, for instance, and that like it's, and you were saying, Ebony, that it's very popular with with the younger generation as like reclaiming and an umbrella term to refer to as many people. But Valerie was saying that she, a generational thing perhaps, but like someone outside the community, is it okay for them to refer to me as queer? I would say fine, but other people might not so.
Right.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ebony. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to piggyback on that. I think, yeah, again, it's a matter of preference, but queer, I think, can identify identity as well as your sexual attraction. And I think that is where the umbrella comes in, and that's where you can put all these letters under there and say. But also, when we're talking about queer as an identity, though, I think it's important, as you said, Valerie, getting back to like building relationships. It's important to know, how people want to be identified, because it does vary from person to person. Just like Black people aren't a monolith, gay people aren't either. Go figure, right? And so, what I was saying about the older generation, in my experience, with my elders, so Black LGBTQ folk are not necessarily always so open to using queer because of the historical context of it, right? That it was used for them as a derogatory term, and so they don't identify with that as much as some of our younger generations, including myself as a millennial, who have worked to include that word and to take the power back and to use it when referring to ourselves and others, like you said, out of respect and love. So I think the biggest thing, Valerie, is just to ask, ask those questions. How do you prefer to be identified? And that's really the basis.
So let me ask you this. So when we talked initially too about pronouns and how we should ask what pronouns you prefer, what do you say to those who feel like, well, I shouldn't have to? Now, I might need to ask you what pronouns you prefer, but there are people who have said, with everybody, when you introduce yourself, everyone should say, hi, I'm Valerie, and I prefer the pronoun she or her, but I'm not a part of the community. So what do you say to people who say, well, I shouldn't have to do that? Because
I think that's a true sign of allyship. that
Okay.
even though, because it doesn't impact you personally, you're setting the stage and you're setting the culture for the environment that you're in.
Gotcha.
You're
Okay.
lending yourself to me as a friend, as an ally, to say, even though obviously I'm Valerie and, you know, I'm a woman and I prefer she, her, hers, you're letting everyone else in the room know that A, it's important. And it's about respect. You know, we can't engage in any type of dialogue if you are, consistently misgendering me, or not even caring to ask, or not even caring that I feel comfortable in the space. So I think it's important not only to say, you know, to introduce yourself with them, but, you know, at my job, we're asking that people add them to their emails, add your pronouns to your emails. It's, you know, becomes consistent throughout the culture of the organization. Then it becomes easier for everyone to remember to do.
Well, how about that? Look what I did.
And you just, there we go.
You are an
Hey.
ally.
I learned two things today. One, why to say my pronouns, and two, where to put them. Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, but you know what? I'm so glad that we had that question, because one of my questions was going to be to you, what does an ally even look like, or how do they show up? And if you're saying that's a clear sign right there, that's good to know. What are some other ways that people outside of the community can be allies to the community? Like, Carly, what about you? What do you think? Like, if we're in the workplace, is there some scenario that could transpire that would make you feel more like someone is an ally versus not being an ally?
Well, I think great question. I think having some sensitivity and some, like, you know, not making assumptions. It's easy, you know, you might look at me and make some assumptions, and but you know, there might be someone else that, you know, heteronormity comes out in our conversation all the time. Like when you ask a woman if she has a boyfriend, for instance, or something like that. Like those are like little things that we don't always think of. But if you are, you know, intentionally say, hey, do you have a partner? You know, do you ask anyone if they have a partner, because you don't know, you don't know, you know, just because someone presents a certain way. So I think having some sensitivity around that. Man, how else does the ally look? Great question. I don't know.
That's
I
a
have
good
a
point,
feeling
though.
Ebony has some really good things on this, though.
No, that's a good point. And I learned this probably when I was on, you know, I always tell people about when I used to work on ships, right? Because working on ships, there is no culture that's not represented on a ship. I mean, in every fashion. Okay. So I learned, you know, very early on that you can't just say, hey, are you married, or do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Because if you say boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife kind of thing, then you are making assumptions when you say it in that way. So I would just say something like, so are you seeing anyone right now? Because then they can then come forward with, yes, I have whatever I have. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I didn't even think about it like that. That too is showing some sensitivity. I just thought it felt more appropriate, because you always are putting people on the spot if the answer doesn't show up the way you thought it was going to show up, you know, and you may be creating an awkward situation for somebody else. Not that they should feel awkward, but you've created a awkward situation. Ebony, what's a way that you could see someone showing up as an ally in the workplace potentially?
Yeah, I agree with Carly. I think when we talk about, I think you have to acknowledge that comes with being cisgender and heterosexual in society. They look like having protections at work. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people realize is that, you know, federally, the Supreme Court just ruled this past summer that LGBTQ people have protections in the workplace. And so prior to that, you know, we could be fired for simply just existing. You know, that is a privilege that our heteronormative sexual counterparts have, and that don't even realize that they have. And so to me, I think it's really about taking actions that are going to make your coworkers, your LGBTQ plus coworkers, feel affirmed and safe and safer in those spaces. Because what we know is that, you know, everybody deals with stuff at work, right? But sometimes it's important to know what other people are dealing with, the intersections of their identity and how that impacts them from day to day. And we know that, you know, LGBTQ people, we have, they're twice as likely to suffer from, you know, mental health, like depression or suicidal ideations. And so it's important to know those things. It's important because how you treat them or affirm them at work can drastically impact their life and their social and their health determinants as well.
Especially when work is where we spend most of our waking moments, you know?
Exactly.
So surely it would. I would say this, you know, in the same way I would tell people, look, if I hear racial, inappropriate racial jokes of any kind said in the workplace, whether it's directed towards myself or my a group that I associate with, when I hear that type of behavior, I cut it off. If I were to hear someone saying something inappropriate or that could be taken offensively to someone of the LGBTQ plus community, I think it's important to stand up in that moment and say, hey, don't do that. Don't say that. That's unacceptable. You know, because I know that there's sometimes peer pressure that people feel, and that seems weird to even mention, but it's factual. You know, even the fact that we're all adults in the workplace, people still are easily influenced or they feel like they have to go with whatever's happening. And the truth is you don't. And that is a way that we cut down harassment in the workplace as a whole, because if you don't accept this type of behavior, it sends a message about all the other inappropriate things that they shouldn't be doing as well. And they'll be second guessing what they're going to say and do in front of you. So
and that's why it's so important, I think, to when we talk about it's so important that our agencies, that our employers have policies in place that are going to also protect it. Because yes, that's a great allyship of you to take action to say, hey, that's not cool. But what does it say about the culture of that environment or that institution that those types of things are not only being said, but they're not being reported? That we have no guidelines to how we should treat and respect one another. And so that comes back on your agency to say, you know, this is our culture. We're inclusive here, right? And it's an expectation that we treat one another with respect and dignity.
Something else that we touched upon, and I meant to ask this on the front end too, when we were talking about what those letters represent. Let's talk about what cisgender means, because I know that a lot of people, that's probably a banner I should have created, because it's CIS gender, correct?
Yeah. So I was going to mention that earlier when Carly mentioned that she identifies as gender nonconforming. I think that's probably one of the more confusing pronouns or identifications, right? So for me, I am cisgender. That simply means that the way in which I identify matches my my sexual identity at birth. So orientation, biology at birth. I was born a female and I identify as a female. For some people, so that's cisgender. We talk about transgender, we're talking about folks who were perhaps born a female, but identify as something different. So they can identify as male, they can identify as gender nonconforming as well. And so that's where the pronouns come in. So the pronouns align my gender, my biology and how I want to be identified. Because sometimes, I should say, sometimes they don't align. I hope that made sense.
Yep, it does. Let's talk about, let's see, how do we say this? Because I don't want to highlight things that we shouldn't do and say. I'd rather speak on what we should be saying and doing, but I don't know if we can get around it. When we were talking before we taped, I said it's important for us to have clear understandings of what things are not appropriate anymore, that maybe people felt, not that it was appropriate, but at a different time, but that people felt freer to use certain terms, even though they should not have been using them. So when we talk about, how do I say this? I don't even know if I need to
The
say
trans
it.
community.
We stick with the terms that are used in the LGBTQ. You said IA, not necessarily those, but LGBTQ. If we just stick with those terms and those terms only, except for the Q, because again, we don't know who we're talking to, who might even take offense to the Q word. But if we just stick with the LGBT as they are stated there and don't use any other terms outside of that, would that be correct?
I mean, it's a fair assumption. It's not wrong. Again, I think more important is just to, if you don't know, I think people respect you more if you acknowledge what you don't know and acknowledge that, hey, I might make a mistake here. But I think absolutely it's fair to say that if you use, lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, no one's going to say, oh, how dare you?
Right.
No
Right.
one's going to say that. So
That's
I think, yes, I think that's a safe assumption to stick with those. And like we talked about, the Q can be a personal preference, but again, just ask people. I think you're much better off than not saying anything at all or saying the wrong thing.
Yeah. I think especially if we're talking in the workplace, let's just stay there and not even sure that we need to be talking about those things in the workplace. Am I wrong to think that? And I say that because outside of you just having a conversation and trying to gain an understanding, I don't know that there would be a real reason in most work environments to have to dive in deep about things.
Oh, go ahead, Carly.
Yeah, I just think I mean, it's a hard line to navigate, but I think Ebony was really hitting it on the head that like just ask, like that to me shows allyship, that you're thinking about it and that you want to say the right thing and that you want to do the right thing by me. Like I'm not, like of course, we don't need to be trying to get into like details. Like, there are things that are inappropriate at work. Like, you don't need to know details about my life.
Right.
But you need to understand how I want to identify, what I like to be called, what my, like, if I do have a partner, if I like, there are things that you wouldn't know unless you ask. And I think it's appropriate to ask, what are your pronouns? How do you identify? Are there things that I can call you? Are there things that you don't want me to call you? Things like that.
Yeah, I think because when you look at those letters, we're really talking about two things. We're talking about sexuality in the front of it, in the front end of it, the lesbian, the bisexual, the gay. That's sexuality. That's who I'm attracted to. But then on the back end of that, the T and the Q, we're talking about identity. We're talking about how people identify. And so when we're talking about work, I agree with Carly that we want to know how people identify, because we want them to understand that we respect them and we honor them. And that's how you, build relationships, right? In the workplace, build cultures that are safer for people. So understanding how people identify is always appropriate for work. The front end of that, the sexuality piece, I don't know that that's necessarily appropriate, but I think you also take cues from people. Like I'm someone who at work, I don't necessarily like have pictures up or, but then I have a coworker who has, her wife and her dog and, all the pictures are, in the office. And that's, if you walked into that office, you would naturally, just like anyone, you would ask questions about those photos. Oh, where'd you and your wife go? Or where was this taken? That's appropriate because she's showing you pieces of her life that she probably wants you to ask about, right? And so again, if we think about it in those two ways, the front end of it, not necessary. But if they're open to discussing it in appropriate ways, sure. But just be careful about, harassment, right? You don't want to get, like she said, like Carly said, the details. But the back end of that, the identity piece is crucial. It's important. It should be something that we all work to be more aware of in any organization, I think.
I like it. I like it. Well, okay. Well, look, we couldn't have this whole conversation in this small smidgen of time. So let me ask you this. Could I get you guys to come back? And so we can continue the conversation and maybe we can even flush out what we want to attack specifically and dive deep into. But I love the takeaways I've gotten are understanding that the first few letters of the community's name is in reference to sexuality. The last are about identity, and that's what we should be concerned about. Understanding the purpose of even asking about the pronouns and not getting those pronouns confused with other, I don't know what other titles and words. It's not necessarily about gender, right? It's about how one identifies as well. Yes.
So gender pronouns. If you think about pronouns as your preferred gender pronoun, it is about gender, right? It's your preferred gender pronoun. So that's important to take away. What is also important is to know that your gender identity has nothing to do with your sexuality, and your gender identity can be different from your sexual biology. Those things, I think, if you keep those things in mind, I think you'll be okay.
Yes.
There's a real great resource out there there's a video called The Gender Unicorn. If you look that up, it explains it very well.
I think I actually have it saved. I could send it to you, Valerie.
Nice.
Please.
Nice.
The gender.
Yeah, but anyone who's watching, The Gender Unicorn, I think it's available on, you can just find it, right?
Yeah, you just Google it.
Yep. It explains the difference. Because Ebony, you have explained that like so precisely and so clearly. Thank you for the language you've offered today. Because there are different things going on, even just within LGBTQIA, LGBTQ plus. There's different elements that we if you are passionate about being an ally, this is how you become an ally. You educate yourself on these things, just like Valerie's doing. So
I want to thank you both because, look, I feel like I'm the most layman there is to be having this discussion with. So if you can break it down to me like I'm in the third grade, then I think everybody else can get it too. You know what I'm saying? So I enjoy learning and getting new perspectives on people and things that maybe I had it wrong all along because I wasn't even sure about some of this stuff. So I'm happy that we had this discussion. I'm definitely going to have you guys back. And everyone else, if you are watching this video, it will air on this week at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. On this Friday, but it will always sit out here. So if anybody wants to come back and replay this video again and again until they catch some of these things that we were throwing out there today, please do. All right. So thank you all for coming and have a great day. All right. Thank you, guys.
thank you.